Welcome to Decoded, the podcast that decodes the design, technology, and experiences shaping our world and planet. I am Elisa Leñero.
And I'm Saima Ahmed Christensen. Together we explore the systems, behaviors, and technologies influencing how we live, work, and connect, from human interactions to the ecosystems we are part of.
Each episode is a conversation with technologists, designers, entrepreneurs, and everyday users. Join us.
Hi, welcome back to the show. I'm Saima, and I'm a professor of design engineering and innovation and director of DigitLab, exploring design and digital technologies based in the University of Exeter.
And I am Elisa. I'm a designer by training and currently rediscovering what design is in times where the world is challenged in many different ways, from the artificial intelligence revolution to the deep societal changes and massive ecosystem destruction. In today's episode, we will be exploring the theme of entrepreneurship and how startups are supported in their growth trajectory with today's guest, John Kermath. Welcome, John. John
Thank you.
is a
Glad
co-founder.
to be here.
Thank you. John is a co-founder of London Green City and later stage accelerator and incubator of tech ventures in London. He has spent over 25 years in fund management, investment banking, and venture advisory. He currently serves on the board of Ecosphere Ventures, a pre-seed venture fund, Sender International, a UK-based advisory firm, and Epochal Technologies, an AI data science firm. He previously co-led the restart of superconductor tech company. Prior to that, he was recruited to restructure a multi-billion hedge fund, subsequently stepping up to become the president CEO of the fund. He is a past president of the board member of the Houston Venture Capital Association and has served on multiple venture and non-for-profit boards. Mr. Kermath also began his career at Citibank and Deutsche Bank and previously served in the U.S. Army. He is a graduate of Princeton University with a degree of economics. So thank you again for joining us, John. There's going to be a great discussion on entrepreneurship.
Thank you.
Most of our listeners are designers and technologists, and some of them already have their businesses, and some of them are aspiring to set up their venture. Can you, since you have substantial experience on supporting ventures with commercialization and direct experience as an entrepreneur yourself and a president of different boards as well, could you please talk through or walk us through some of the challenges that you faced while you were the president of Metox, the superconductor venture? Can you also explain a little bit more of Metox so then people know about it?
I will. So let me first explain that Metox is a manufacturer of superconductors, and superconductors have a very important role in high-field magnets, which are important to fusion, very critical to fusion, at least commercial fusion. But also the superconductors are very important in helping to reconductor these rights of way where we have transmission lines, allowing us to expand the grid. So it was a very pivotal technology to get out into the market. The challenge that, just a few sort of comments along the way, one of the first challenges we had was the company had done some fantastic research in the process of making superconductors. A lot of this was done at the University of Houston. And then some of the key researchers had come over to Metox. But Metox had issues with its funding source. And so when I came in with my colleague, Jim Jewett, and we restarted effectively the company had spent years with very little funding to continue the research that they had begun at University of Houston. The challenge that they had was that their focus had been for so long on research that they hadn't begun to sort of think about the product that they were creating and how that would interface with the market. And one of the key aspects of this sort of new perspective that we had to introduce into the company was, what does the customer want? What's the design of the product? How is that important? And at the end of the day, there's no use in having fantastic research if you can't make that research have impact in a commercial environment. And that's the environment that is basically customers that are buying your product, utilizing your product and seeing value in it.
And that's really interesting, because what you're describing there is first a process invention. Am I correct in understanding that? So it was a new process to develop superconductors. Is that correct?
Correct.
Right.
It,
And then, yeah, sorry.
no, I was just going to say there were other processes that were in the market, but this process had the potential to create a at least cost or a more cost efficient product, because you could produce more of the product in less time. So basically, it was a throughput issue.
Yeah. And then that's really interesting, because I guess that's a manufacturing process, and you're still looking for the end customer in that process, in that. And when we teach product development, often it's taught in two ways, that there's two main models. I mean, I'm currently challenging those thinking, but the way that it is traditionally taught is either that you have a clear market need and then you develop something that solves that need, or you develop, you have a technology ready. So it's a technology push. So the examples often given are like Teflon, when non-sticky materials arrive. That's always the one that's given. And then looking for markets of where that's valuable. So what you've got in your process is that process before, because you're doing that invention of actually developing that technology. And it's not really clear whether it's the market or the technology push. So where do you go? How do you realize where the customers are, and how do you help that company to identify where their needs are?
Well, let me look at that particular example, and your analysis is exactly right on. There are companies that are addressing directly a challenge that they see in the market. And that might be in the equivalent. I'll use an analogy which probably is overused, but that might be in the year of a horse and buggy. It might be, better wheels for, basically your vehicle. But we were more on the other side, which is developing a car that nobody knew they needed. And so our product had immediately this issue of, did anybody care? And so how did we approach the market? Well, we first looked at the characteristics of what we were developing and said, do we solve somebody's problem out there today? And frankly, for a long time, we weren't sure that we were solving an urgent problem. We thought that it was going to be a long process to engage with the market and say, this is something new. This is something you haven't tried, but this is something you need to try. And let's find out where it fits in your overall mosaic of product, the products you've got in the market. So when we looked at this, we in fact we looked at a completely different market than the fusion market, and it so happened that we actually solved a problem in the fusion market that we didn't realize we were solving. And to the very issue of, do we help somebody with an urgent need? As it turned out, fusion had an urgent need. So we got a little bit of a head start. We were lucky. And sometimes it's helpful because the market shifted and we were able to see an opportunity that we couldn't see when we were initially going out to the market. So I would say that we had ideas, and we began to explore those ideas. And really the best thing you can do is be in the market and have conversations. Don't try to dream it up using today AI and saying, what does ChatGPT think I should do? Or, all the equivalents. The important thing is to go out in the market and just be in the market and listen. And that's very hard for people to do that would rather simply be working on a new innovation. So we find that it's a bit of a cultural change, but it's one that we all can do, and we just need to get out there and do it. Somebody that's developed the original technology would have the same capability of listening to a customer and saying, we can change this feature and do this. The design adjusts to the market.
I love that you were saying that. And I want to stress the point of that you were saying, because it's actually part of the design process, right? Actually go outside, talk to your people, talk to the client. We had another episode where we invited an anthropologist, and she was also telling us the best way to do is to go outside, talk to your market. Don't wait for AI to give you those answers, because there are non-answers from AI on that regard. But I want to kind of go deeper into that lane, because you are a graduate of a degree in economics. So I think that mindset of economics, and then all the backgrounds and the the journey that you had, it's connected to design, but how were you able to kind of see that the importance of talking to people coming from a different background that is not exactly the design background that has been taught at university?
Well, I'll first start with the idea that COVID showed us how important it was, which is that you need to be with people and you need to talk with people. I would say 90% of what I know, it comes from knowledge from other people. And I think unless you're out there talking to people, whether it's generally talking to people or talking to your market, a lot of great ideas come out of those conversations. If you're talking about, for instance, bringing out a new transformer, let's say, and just electrical for the grid. If you're talking about bringing a new transformer out, talk to people who have brought products out. So you're talking about the generics of what it takes to go to market. What are those experiences? Listen to those experiences, but also go and talk to the people specifically in that market as well. I think it's a combination of both. And did my degree in economics help me? Yes, it was helpful, but was that the key factor? No, I think really the key factor is getting into the market, talking to people. And it's not something, again, that we do readily because we want to be spending the time on the science or the technology and the engineering. And you have to get out of your comfort zone. It's very important to get out of your comfort zone. And unless you do, you can't see something that might be fantastic for you that's different than what you thought. I liken a little bit to when I was in the Army, and you always had a battle plan for the next conflict that you were getting into. But as soon as you got into the conflict, the whole plan changed. But having that plan was critical because it gave you all the tools to think about, the framework that allowed you to think about what you were doing.
That's fascinating. And I think the importance of getting out there and talking is fascinating. And drawing on Melissa's points, such as the anthropologist and in design, how we are taught to go out and speak to your client and potential users. There is a big difference here, which is that we don't know who that client is. So how do you help? How do you help that when you were in Metox? How did you understand that fusion was a likely market?
We didn't.
You didn't?
That was
I
a
will
short
be honest
answer.
with you. No, we thought that we thought that there were applications in the grid that were very important. And here's my comment, and I know this is something that I think so many people do know, but they don't employ the concept, which is start anywhere. Start anywhere, but start. You have to start somewhere. When we started, we were talking about using these superconductors potentially as effectively very sophisticated grid fuses. So the fuses that you have in your house that protect your house. These would be fuses that protect the grid from a major disruption that might ripple through the grid and cut off power for huge sectors of the coverage area. So you start out there. As it turned out, we went to a conference, and the fusion people basically showed up at the conference, and they said, "Look, we're trying to collapse the size of these fusion generators that we think are the future of power." And I could say ample great things about fusion as a potential power source, but they realized that to collapse the size of what they needed very high field magnets. The existing technology could not provide them with high field magnets. So you could literally do 3x, 4x of the magnetic sort of strength that you needed with these superconductors rather than the old superconductors. So these are high temperature superconductors, as they call them, versus what we call low temperature superconductors. That was key because you didn't want your fusion plant to be the size of a soccer field or a football club field. You wanted them to be the size of, something maybe a fifth or a quarter of that size that would then slot conveniently into an urban setting. So they had a need. They were expressing their need. They said, here's what we think we'll need to do. We sat down with them and we said, not only do we agree with you that we can get the strength of our superconducting magnets up there, but you have to tell us what are the operating conditions that you need this magnet to operate, and therefore the wiring. So it was a conversation that happened by luck. As it turns out that there was a need in the exact area we were looking at slightly off center from that. So instead of for fuses for the grid, superconductors providing that, what we realized is that the grid simply needed better wiring, and it needed wiring where they couldn't get the permits to do such wiring unless they reconductored. So if you think of a transmission line that goes through an area and you can't expand the capacity of that transmission line, as it turns out, you can get 10x um, the power throughput through something with the same form fit with superconductors. So that was something that if fusion had not occurred, we were looking and gravitating towards an enhancement of, or a slight evolution of the idea we started in the grid. So again, there were two factors here. Turns out fusion was the critical market. The fusion could not advance without, or at least certainly the magnetic containment fusion version could not advance without our superconducting wire.
It sounds like that you also not only found that market, but that market informed the other additional requirements needed for your technology to develop. So it was a co-creation type approach, if I'm correct in reflecting on it. I wonder if this is a good point to just talk about, because I had a few weeks ago the pleasure of being able to see London Green City, which you've co-founded along the Thames. And I was fortunate to visit both the prototype facilities and see many of the startups that you have as part of it. And I was wondering, from your experience as an entrepreneur, what has driven you to be part of this? What's the vision of London Green City? Perhaps you can speak and say a little bit about this.
Sure. London Green City is a later stage accelerator, and often people use the word incubator, so we'll call it accelerator incubator, of technology companies that basically are looking to move from a proof of concept into the market and begin to sort of look at how to scale in the market as soon as you get some traction. So it's a critical phase in development. It's one thing to do a very good job in developing the technology, but again, as I mentioned earlier, the technology may look beautiful, but nobody's going to care unless you can get into the market and is useful for people. So what we focus on is that phase. And that phase is a very tricky phase. It's a phase that generally takes the entrepreneurs out of their comfort zone if they have not been previously been entrepreneurs, and they've been primarily focused on engineering, design, and scientific research. So what we realized, and sort of going back to what was the idea behind this, is I would say that in the earlier days of the establishment of kind of the venture capital community, which we know well now, but in what I call the late 60s, 70s, where venture capital firms were sort of developing, they were getting off the ground. One of the things that they did was they spent a lot of time with their portfolio companies. So they'd make an investment and they would spend time with those companies and help accelerate the development of those companies. When I say accelerate the development, they could bring the knowledge of other experiences they had with the companies into, and these are the venture capitalists. They could also make connections between their particular venture and other pieces of the ecosystem that might be important or other potential stakeholders. So one of the things that we did, as just a quick example, at Medox, we began to work with Corning, and we worked with Corning on the validation of our technology. Why Corning? Because Corning had a name in the market. They were considered to be a very high quality manufacturer, established manufacturer. And that was good for what I call, giving us it is clearly the validation that helps us get in the door to talk to other people. So we looked at what the market was originally, and what's happened is venture capital firms over time are operating in a more and more competitive market. They have to see more companies to be able to establish kind of which companies they want to spend time on. This isn't take 100 and boil down to 5. This is take 500 and boil it down to 5. And I say that because what's happened is that there's still the need in the market. These companies still need help in that phase, but they're no longer really getting it from the venture firms to the extent they were before.
Mm-hmm.
And that's varies by venture firm, but in general, we've seen that as being a challenge. So what we've seen accelerators and incubators develop in the U.S. that are trying to fill this need. And one of the incubators that does a very good job filling this need. They've got 240 companies under their roof, and that's Greentown Labs in Boston. So there are models out there for what was a concern that I was seeing from the investment side. So I started off on the investment side, looking over the shoulders of some of these great technologists, these different firms. So we saw that and we saw the need, but it was really the visit of the Prince and Princess of Wales to London Green City in 2022 that was the catalyst. So as we thought about a need in the market, they basically said, "We need you in the UK." When they say we need you, which is Greentown Labs at that time, it became the catalyst for my, in effect, trying to work with Greentown Labs on bringing what became London Green City.
Right. I think before we jump into the acceleration part, let's go back a little bit from the pivot that you've done. Like you've talked about some of the pivots that you've done with Medox, and now you also mentioned some of the pivots that you've done at Green City, London Green City. Can I ask you, in retrospect, right now, it feels that the decisions were seamless and that you knew kind of this are the decision that we have to move forward. And probably you're laughing because you know that it's not that simple. So how do you make those decisions when you are pivoting? How do you also recognize that you have to pivot or that you are there for the long run?
I think one of the most important things, and this is not obvious, I think, to a lot of people, is that when you start with a plan, and this goes back to that concept of the battle plan for the Army, when you start with a plan and the plan doesn't unfold how you thought, you've got to ask the question, why didn't it unfold as you thought? And you've got to employ what I call sort of the machine learning aspect of, we've got to learn what worked and didn't work. And maybe our thesis was wrong, or maybe we haven't seen enough data points. And those are always, challenges. When we started London Green City, we focused, for instance, in and narrowed it down to, we were going to focus primarily in the climate space. And then what we realized that solving simply climate problems was a much bigger issue. So, for instance, if you were going to back, just as an example, fusion energy, one of the challenges you have is once the engineering has been done to a point where you can prove that fusion's possible and it's economic potentially, that you've got to have supply chains there. So we look now at supply chains, and we look at now even further than that, we look at enabling technologies. So we started out with this idea that with what we consider to be a great definition, what's our domain, what's our focus area, and then we realized, wait a second, AI is very important, machine learning is very important, and because of that, data centers are very important. And well, data centers create problems for climate, but they're potentially a source of, or they're the infrastructure for AI that provides incredible solutions for efficiency in the future. So we've looked at that. We've looked at robotics. We've expanded our view. So you start off with the premise. You have to start out with the premise. You've got to be logical in how you start. You've got to have a plan, but know that plan's going to have to change. But you won't know to change or what to change unless you started with a plan and measure that plan constantly. And we're measuring it, I don't want to say daily, we're measuring it probably weekly, maybe monthly. So we make those pivots, those changes, and that's really mirroring what our businesses do, the members that we have in our incubator.
So what would success look like for you, John? What would success look like for London Green City?
Well, success would be creating the, fantastic companies. There are various measures of success, but we would say that if we create a few unicorns out of some great technologies that are available in the UK, that we've done most of our job. And incubators typically focus on survivability of their companies. That's a good factor, but what you don't want to do is see survivability of what I call zombies. And that's always a fear when you're focused on just survivability.
Right. I love that you said unicorns, especially because we had another guest at the podcast, and he also shared how the investment environment in the UK is quite risk averse, and that has been also my experience. And you're right now based in the US at the moment. So like you're talking about unicorns, are those companies UK based companies and the other question is, how do you see that difference between the US appetite and risk aversion versus the UK risk aversion? to accelerate companies and to really, really accelerate and invest in these unicorns that we're looking at?
I think there's a lot more going on in the UK market, but I'll start off by saying, yes, there's more risk aversion, certainly to venture capital. And I think that starts, strangely enough, it actually starts at the institutional investment level. When you look at the US market, a lot of the public employee retirement funds, which are the big sort of sources of capital, and the universities themselves allocate quite a bit to alternatives. And within that bucket of alternatives, they allocate to venture. I think that allows for more capital to go into the venture community, which allows more managers to split off from where they start from. And you have this, you grow this whole ecosystem just within that investment sector that I think is really important. So that's been important in the US. There is probably culturally a bit of a difference, but I think that's changing. And I think that uh, I would say just in the last 15 months, which is, the time period in which we've been open, there's been fantastic changes in, um, in the venture investing community. Now there needs to be a whole lot more fill in. And so part of what we do is we bring those relationships we have in the United States and we bring those relationships we have elsewhere, whether it's the Far East or Europe. We bring we bring those kinds of venture firms, investors into this community. But I would say there's a difference in risk appetite, but it's changing, and I think it's changing for the better. And I'm excited to see it. If there were 10 more London green cities, I don't care if it's competition with us. That's great for this ecosystem. It's fantastic, and it's great for the UK.
John, what would you say are the key parts of that ecosystem?
Oh, so let's start with the entrepreneurs.
Mhm.
And the entrepreneurs aren't necessarily what I call the chief technology officers ultimately in these companies. Chief technology officers tend to be the ones that originated the research or engineering that brought up something useful for going to market with. But there's clearly the entrepreneurs, and we're excited to say that we have seen. We go to many of these gatherings that are taking place all the time, whether it's Venture Cafe or Climate Connections or such. We go to these gatherings and we see so many people that either want to be entrepreneurs or are entrepreneurs out there, and let's start with that. So you need the entrepreneurs because otherwise everything else is moot. You do need the financiers, the investors. It tends to be that early stage, the entrepreneurs get funding either by not taking salaries, by grants. And so the government's early grant programs that UK Innovate UK and generally part of UKRI are very important. Um, but a lot of the families of members are the early funders. So, your brother might be an investor with you. Your sister's family might be, or your sister's in-laws might be investors with you. These are the family relationships that are part of that really early. In fact, I would even call it pre-seed. But you need the investment community because what happens, particularly in hardware technologies, the cost of progressing to developing a product that you can sell in the market is just far greater than software. So so again, entrepreneurs, certainly the people around the entrepreneurs themselves, certainly the investors and early stage investors, and then later stage investors to take the companies once they've reached, let's say, prototype stage where they've got something that works on a close to a commercial stage, or maybe even they've got something that is a commercial stage that needs to scale. So you need sort of two lots of investors there. There's a great pre-seed community that's developed in the UK. There needs to be more. It's the later stage that needs a lot more work. I would call it Series A, Series B. So the investor community, but you need the government's involvement with providing some grants. And sometimes the funding actually comes from the university itself because the university says, look, use our labs, develop the IP or the intellectual property, and then we'll license that out to somebody that can either either buy that license or license that technology. So
Are you
But
seeing in that first bit in your ecosystem, are you seeing, because you're referring to the universities, are you also seeing startups and entrepreneurs coming from outside of the university environment?
yes, it's funny because there are plenty of people that we've come across that come out of industry that
Mm.
see a need, and then they know of a technology. They happen to come across a technology that fits that need. So going back to your comment, Seema, originally is, there's where the market has a need. Sometimes it's I would say it's by luck, but sometimes it takes an individual who's in a business, whether it's I'll pick Siemens Energy or Bosch or Shell, who sees a particular need in the market. They see that it's not something that the company that they're currently employed by is going to pursue, and maybe it's either too small for them to pursue because they need billion-dollar businesses, or it's something that just isn't on the agenda, and they're not sure how to navigate what I call sort of the multiple sort of layers within a company to be able to do it. So we've seen people come out of industry. We've seen people that have been prior entrepreneurs, but we do see people that come out of that come out of universities. Um, the prior entrepreneurs are actually another factor, another stakeholder in the community, in the ecosystem that I did not mention. Those prior entrepreneurs are the ones that can say, I know how to do this now, and I'm going to go in and do it. Obviously, we think that another missing piece in here is the incubators and accelerators that then cover for all the pieces that are missing.
And when you're talking about the person or the entrepreneur that already knows kind of, okay, we've pivoted already, we have tested, we have the friends and family round, um, which is the round that you are referring as the pre-seed, right? Can you describe also some of the challenges? Because I think we talked about some of the challenges as entrepreneurs and the ecosystem, but what about the challenges when you are commercializing technologies? It might not be so simple as it was, for example, I don't know, how is it with the differences with a product? But yeah, can you describe some of the challenges of commercializing technologies?
So it's going to be very different company to company, but the generic challenges that I think these companies face is, first of all, defining what the customer wants. And then you have to be very careful because just because somebody says, "Gosh, I like that idea, John. Why don't you do this and this?" Are they going to put that on paper with a letter of intent?
Yeah.
What is that relationship that you have? Because you can end up going down a lot of paths.
Mhm,
And I will say this is probably one of the most frustrating things that you find in entrepreneurship is that there are a lot of rabbit trails
mhm.
that you can go down. And you will learn from those rabbit trails, but it's frustrating because just when you think that, and I've said in a number of meetings where I've listened to an early stage company say, well, we have this company on board and they are an offtake and party. And I say, well, have they sent you a letter of intent? And it may be that they have. And now, who do you know at that company and how much you're going to lean on the letter of intent? Can you get other letters of intent? Because we all know that things change in companies. You just talked to BP and BP, had threats from a hedge fund that has had them change their whole business. So you can have external things that affect your relationships with your potential customers. You can lose people who are your contacts on the other side. So there's a lot to this whole process of establishing that relationship. So what are the generic challenges? They are to begin to get traction, commercial traction, to get interest, to begin to define that sort of product, to design it for the market. What does the market need? The second part is very, very important. I didn't emphasize this before is understand how your cost structure could change over time because that's part of your pitch to investors. You might solve a really great problem, but it might cost your potential customer so much that they can't do it. And I'll give you a perfect example is you can talk to a lot of companies about engaging with AI, and
Yeah,
those companies,
ChatGPT.
yeah,
Exactly.
they can't afford it. They can't
Exactly.
afford the consultants. They can't afford the infrastructure that's required for it. So there are a lot of different challenges that you find, but if you start with a customer and you start defining your product, just understand that you've got to have a much wider perspective. Don't expect the one or two people you're talking to be your first customers or to giving you all the right answers for your design. You just the more you see the market, the more you will be prepared for it. You have the flexibility, and you might start off with, company X, and then uh, you'll end up really with Y or Z. And so generic issues are that engagement with the market, and to understand you have to have multiple sort of paths to engage with the market. The second part is that what does it take to go to the next step? What's your roadmap? So just because somebody's shown interest and said, here are these different things that I want, do you have to do a pilot? What is it going to cost you? Where are you going to do the pilot? And what equipment are you going to use? Can you use off the shelf equipment? That's one of the issues that we always ask people is and if you don't, who are your suppliers? Because it might be that you're using some firms that, um, that are going to end up costing you and your product a lot of money, and you have what I call a single source for that particular aspect of what you're doing. So there's the pilot stage. There's the stage of saying, okay, we've done the pilot. Now, what's the volume that we need? How do we design the next phase, which is the first commercial sort of, let's say, product line, and I'll use sort of that more generically. When you go to that sort of stage and you talk about what your product line is going to be, you need to be able to sort of enunciate what your costs are going to be for that product line. Again, you've got supplier relationships and you're beginning to grow. And as you scale, you need to scale your supply chains with you. So there's a lot of considerations that go into that. Of course, you need to keep your eye on, do I have cash? That's one of the biggest issues that ventures have, which is often why we start with a roadmap and say, tell us what you think. Tell us what the ideal is. Now tell us what tranches you can operate in. What's the milestone that you need to hit that de-risks this investment for getting the next layer of cash or next layer of investment? So those are some of the challenges. There's multiple challenges, especially when you think about scaling and you begin to, the single source issue, I can't stress enough, was one that gave us a lot of headache at Maddox, because we had one source for the yttrium, which was part of the chemistry of the product itself. And that was a wonderful company in China, but that's no way to operate a business.
Yeah, your supply chain resilience is how
Yes.
they like to call it in academic circles.
We've learned that in COVID, as you know.
Yeah.
The royals visited you and invited you to move to the UK, to open in the UK. That sounds fantastic, and congratulations. How that happened, how it was someone looking, from all the different ecosystem, they turned to you.
Well, to be fair, they turned to Greentown Labs, and Greentown at that point was looking for a CEO. They had an interim CEO, but they were not willing to commit to it. And so I took it out separately. So we London Green City, while we had wonderful support from various individuals as part of Greentown Labs, we took this out and set it up ourselves. So myself and the folks that I knew from the British advisory firm, a lot of people I knew in the London community, and all great support, including Michael Manelli, who was the Lord Mayor of the City of London. Great supporters kind of the effort. Now, Greentown Labs, again, was very helpful in it. And then we re-engaged with Kensington Palace and got involved with the Earshot Prize organization, and then separately with with the chief of staff for the Prince and Princess. Wonderful, wonderful people. And they've extended kind of our ecosystem out, from there, which again, we're very grateful for.
And you've mentioned Greentown Labs there, and that's set up in Boston. Do you want to just quickly describe what that is for the
So if you walk through Greentown Labs, you will think of it as an extremely vibrant community with co-working spaces, which look like probably anybody's co-working spaces. Buildings that, by the way, they're old buildings that were done in just outside of Cambridge and Boston, if you sort of know where Harvard and MIT are. Just outside of there is Somerville. And just they rebuilt or refurbished some buildings with lab space, whether it's electronic labs, wet labs, prototype space where people could assemble the prototypes based on the tools or tooling that they ended up getting from the machine shops and such. All of that was under one roof where you could go from your desk to the machine shop. They also have a wonderful village green where they host a lot of speakers to bring in topics that they think are of interest to members. They also hold mixers. They have 240 companies that are part of their ecosystem, but it's spread between both Boston and Houston, Texas. And they've had wonderful sponsors. Those sponsors have also joined us as well. They've had wonderful sponsors that have been on board with them. They've had mentors and advisor groups. Again, we've replicated that. We have wonderful pro bono folks that help the companies, that'll spend time with the companies and don't charge the companies. So their model was really a beautiful model. I would encourage you, if you have the occasion to be in Boston and you're really interested in either looking at how Greentown Labs helps the venture community, or you're looking at being a mentor or an advisor to Greentown Labs, let us know and we can set you up with a visit there. It's similar to London Green City. We're not as big. Right now we've got 13 members. We're going to 25 members. We've got expansion of the building, but we probably aren't going to be 240 members soon.
Wow. And looking at your experience across those two, you earlier talked about the ecosystem that so you had the funding, the entrepreneurs, and the different layers in there. Can you see fundamental differences or any differences between the Boston ecosystem and that of entrepreneurship in London or UK?
Strangely enough, I'm very happy to say that I'm seeing a lot of women entrepreneurs in the UK ecosystem, more than the percentage that I'm seeing certainly in the Boston area. Again, my data points might be too few, but I'm very, very happy to see that. And there's some great organizations that do support women entrepreneurs. And that's, I think, a key part of developing the ecosystem out. So that's a first observation. When I think of Greentown Labs, and of course their size really helps them, they get visits certainly weekly by major VC firms. There aren't as many VC firms sort of per entrepreneur in the UK yet, and that's the developing aspect of the ecosystem. But that will come over time. It's a denser, richer environment when you think of the US. There's the support systems, the number of serial entrepreneurs that are available in and around that help. There are also venture building organizations that create a different kind of entrepreneurship, one that you kind of addressed when you said there are problems in the market and there are companies that look to solve the problems. So it's a denser, richer community, but when I think of the technology and innovation that's available in the States, and again, it's proportional here, but the UK has incredible innovation. And the problem had been that a lot of entrepreneurs were starting in the UK and then moving to the US or moving elsewhere because the support systems were better in the US. And we think that's changing a lot right now.
And what would you recommend also as in the ecosystem that you are referring to? What is needed that hasn't been addressed yet regarding some of the solutions that you think from your experience might be quite disruptive or quite important to have around?
I think that the culture needs to evolve a little bit further into more risk-taking.
Yeah.
I think that's part of it, and it is. So I don't know how you change that necessarily, except all the people who are working in the ecosystem, and there's so many wonderful players in the ecosystem, organizations that put on events, the organizations that teach. There's a great organization I just came across the other day that educates women to become entrepreneurs and works then with women entrepreneurs themselves. They're on their second cohort right now. Those types of pieces in the ecosystem, I think, are really important. What we do, we feel like is very important because we actually take a view that we're also assisting in developing policy. So we think there's a policy environment that's very important. There are rules on, and it can be something as simple as setting up a bank account. If it takes 3 months to set up a bank account, forget it. You're never going to have an ecosystem here. Now, there are a few fintechs that have developed to fill that gap. But I'm sorry, but if you can't go to a major bank and get an account set up because there's, endless amounts of red tape, and we're going through that process ourselves and switching bank accounts right now. And I can tell you it's frustrating. The US has got a lot of frustrating aspects as well to it, but you've had, the government's been looking, I think, really carefully at a lot of this, but the talk has got to stop and the action has to start. And one of the things that I would say culturally has to become ingrained in the system, that is, again, evolving, and I'm not sure how we're going to be able to push it forward, is it's got to be that aspect, is it's stop the talk, do the action. Let's not talk about and pontificate about things that ought to be done, whether it's at the political or policy level, or whether it's, individuals, influencers in the community. Let's just start getting it done. Roll up your sleeves and do it. And that's so important on so many different levels. It's a drive that starts with profit making. It's one of the reasons why we're concerned about having the government lead on a lot of policy issues that are important to the communities. Let's have the government get out of the way by changing regulations, by making it easier. For instance, being a director, it's frustrating that, one of the things that happens in the venture community is you do have bankruptcies. And if somebody served on the board of a company that had a bankruptcy, or they themselves had a bankruptcy in their past, that's not a stain. That's actually, you learned a lot probably in the process. And you can argue that point in a lot of different ways, but I would say that you have to have that attitude of risk taking. Risk taking involves failure. Accept failure as a likely result and work with failure, because failure is how you learn.
Yeah, that's super important for us. I think, Saeem and I resonate a lot with failure, with the action of failure, and with the
And
with
the learning.
the
And the
learning.
learning.
Exactly.
Sorry,
Was
yes.
part of the masters, right? That's where Saima and I met. I was doing my masters, and she was the head of the program. So, just learning from the failures, which basically are learnings, but we call them failures, but actually are great moments where can put you ahead of the game if you have done that already. So I love what you said, and yeah, also that resonates a lot with the work that we're doing at the NGO that I work with, which is powering women entrepreneurs, and what you said about let the government do some of the policy, but let us do the work also with entrepreneurs. So then we can expand and we can scale some of the products in different countries. So what I'm hearing is not very different to some of the other countries that I work with, which is in a way, I don't know if it's exciting or just like that a major change needs to happen ASAP. Um, and what would you advise to the entrepreneurs that are aspiring to pitch to someone like you, for example, that you have that experience, that you've been playing different roles inside the ecosystem, the entrepreneurial ecosystem. What would you recommend, or what do you look into an entrepreneur besides of what you mentioned around like having a roadmap, being able to pivot, having forecasting the cash? What else do you think that should be advised to, especially the UK landscape, because probably it's different to the US landscape?
I would first say surround yourself with great people. Let's start with that. So surround yourself with, and you won't know what good looks like until you find it, and then that'll calibrate you. But look for good. Look for what is good in the market. When you see that, again, that helps to calibrate you. But start out, find people in the ecosystem. Either it may be people that you consider to be kind of your models out there. Don't be afraid. Be fearless. Be fearless. Don't be afraid to go up to somebody at an event and say, "Hi, my name is Michael, and I'm innovating in this particular space." People, strangely enough, want to help, and I think it's the good side of humanity that you're going to find out there if you push out there, and but keep up your contacts as well. Your contacts become so key. Your networks become very key, because at the end of the day, if you don't have a wide enough network, you may not be able to get the financing you need. If you don't have this set of what I call experts around, and you don't have to give these people roles or titles or anything like that. And I think that's another mistake that people make. Yes, you can create an advisory board. That's wonderful. But be careful. You might end up having 15 people on an advisory board for staff that's 2 in the company. And that looks a little bit odd. So just remember that there are people that are willing, yeah, and you can say to people, listen, I'd love to have your advice. Can I, but be, be respectful of time. And be respectful that you've done your homework when you have those subsequent conversations with people. We talk about failure and learning from failure, but part of learning from failure is to have a plan and to start with a plan and to start with a vision of what you're going to do. When I say be fearless, it goes to that vision issue. Look, I've had people that come to me and I've had to sort of contain myself because it's sort of like, wow, you're going to take on, you know, you're going to take on Goliath here. But I love the fearlessness. I love the ability you take the initiative. Not everybody's going to look the same who's an entrepreneur. Not all. I mean, you can look at all kinds of different companies. Their founders look all different. They may look all the same later, but they all look very different when they first start out.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's really interesting. If I was just reflecting on our conversation, I'm going to try and think what my takeaways are. But I think you've said so many interesting points. Just wanted to come back to a couple on the female entrepreneurs. So we did another episode, sorry, on with a female founder, Irene McLeese, on a data-driven company, Intelligent Cycle Lights, and she actually said there's only 2% of entrepreneurs that are women around the world. So that's quite an interesting fact, actually, that I was a little bit unaware of until she's actually said that. And then I'm reflecting on your 90% of ideas or knowledge coming from other people. And I'm just wondering where mine is. Certainly my ideas definitely come when I'm sitting with other people. My mind sometimes in conferences will drift off and I'll come up with loads of ideas that have nothing to do with what's there. But people are central. So whether it's coming directly from them, it's certainly that interaction is facilitating some thinking that it could be divergent and stimulated from there. But in terms of reflections of takeaways, I've taken quite a few, but I'll try and make them 3. So one is a very clear ecosystem that you've laid out, and it seems like a very similar ecosystem for entrepreneurs, irrespective of where they are, where you've got the entrepreneurs and they could be coming from different places, academia, what we call intrapreneurs, so coming out of companies and coming out of there, and from any ex-entrepreneurs, you call them, the third category.
serial.
Yeah. And that,
not to be confused with the other place that serial gets used.
And the one bit of that entrepreneurship, what resonates with me, when I was a student in Cambridge, I attended the talk of Lord Karen Bill Murray. I don't know if you know him. He's the founder of Cobra Beer. And he actually started his company Cobra off Fulham Palace Road, very close to where we are in Hammersmith and Fulham, which I didn't know, but I read that. But he showed how he started many different companies before. Like one was on golf clubs, and I can't remember all the others that failed as such before he moved here. So that failure being important to an experience and is the other bit I've learned. Then the second takeaway was to have a clear plan. And even if it deviates from the plan, being willingness to understand how you adjusted and why it's failed, and having reflection in there. And then the third aspect that I have been that I picked up along here, so as well as the ecosystem and the importance of people, is understanding is actually a difference between design, which is really how we teach. You generate your requirements, so what everything needs to be done for your customer, to go out and interview your customer. And here, we don't know exactly who your customer is. And what we're learning here, so even though you need to understand those requirements, they're potential customers, and they may not necessarily be your customers. So be mindful of that process, but there's still a matching and co-creation process being in there. Is there another takeaway that you would like to add, John, that I haven't covered?
Again, I'll just make my comment about fearlessness. Don't be afraid of failure. And I don't want to say aggressive beyond sort of reason, but when you think of some of the innovations that we've had out there, some of the unicorns that we see around us, they didn't start with people who were afraid to make change, who were afraid to challenge big players in the market. And I think that's one of the things that entrepreneurs can do far better than large corporations. It's hard for large corporations to make some radical changes, but entrepreneurs can. And that's why we love the engagement as well with the corporate community, because they know that, they see that. Today's corporate people see that fearlessness is very important, but yet they can't have that. They can't have that under their roof easily.
Well, thank you, John. I think it's been a really, really good episode, and we've really learnt a lot along it. And we're excited in the next episode that we will bring Lord John Bird, who's the founder of Big Issue, and hear his thoughts on redesigning thinking for the government, as well as his views on the custodial sentence and its redesign. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed it. Let us know what you think, or if you have an idea for a future guest or topic, at www.decodedpodcast.com.
Don't forget to give us a rating wherever you listen, and follow us on TikTok and Instagram at decoded.podcast. See you!